Now that you have learned how to prepare journal entries and analyze transactions, we can teach you how to prepare adjusting journal entries to make sure all of your accounts have the correct balances.
Right, so adjusting journal entries are needed when a company prepares financial statements. This is the company analyzing each account on the trial balance and making sure the information is correct and up to date.
There are two subtypes of adjusting journal entries. They are deferrals and accruals. Common examples of deferrals include prepaid expenses, which are expenses paid in cash before they are used or consumed, and unearned revenues, which are cases where cash is received before services are performed.
Of adjusting journal entries are accruals. Common examples of accruals include accrued revenues, which are revenues for services performed but not yet received in cash or recorded. The other example of accruals include accrued expenses, which was expenses incurred but not yet paid in cash or recorded.
Adjusting journal entries involve an account from the income statement, a revenue or expense, as well as an account from the balance sheet, an asset, liability or an owner's equity account. The one exception to this is with the cash account. Cash is not used in adjusting journal entries.
One thing you will run into while making adjusting journal entries is the idea of supplies used versus supplies on hand. If the problem you are working on tells you that the supplies on hand equals an amount, then you will need to find the difference between the amount of supplies you started with and what you ended with. If the problem tells you that there was an X amount of supplies used, the total amount of supplies used will be given to you in the problem. These adjusting journal entries are made for the amount of supplies used.
Now let's look at some examples. Let's say you opened a business and decided to prepay your business's rent for the year, paying $1,200. It is now March 30th and you need to prepare adjusting journal entries. What is the journal entry to record the usage of rent? Pause the video here and try to find the answer yourself before continuing. The journal entry to record the usage of rent is to debit rent expense for $300 and credit prepaid rent for $300. The reason we debit rent expense here is because after we prepaid our rent for the year, we cannot recognize it as an expense until it is used. Now we have used 3 months of our rent, so we can now expense it. We debit rent expense to recognize the expense and credit prepaid rent to recognize that it has been used.
Now let's assume we performed a service that we were paid for in advance. Now that we performed the service, we can recognize the revenue. What is the adjusting journal entry? Pause the video here and try to find out. Good. We debit unearned service revenue for $500 and credit service revenue for $500. We debit unearned service revenue to remove the liability from our books and credit service revenue to recognize the revenue now that we performed the service.
Moving into our final set of examples, we are going to deal with supplies. First, let's assume that we used $700 of our supplies. What is the adjusting journal entry? Pause the video and try it for yourself. Right. So the journal entry is a debit to supplies expense for $700 and a credit to supplies for $700. We debit supplies expense here to show the usage of supplies, and we credit our supplies account to show the reduction of the amount of supplies we have on hand.
For our final example, let's assume we started the period with $1,000 of supplies on hand. After taking inventory of our supplies at the end of the period, we found that we have $250 of supplies left. How much of our supplies did we use? Prepare an adjusting journal entry to show this usage of supplies. Pause the video and try to find out. Great! We used $750 of supplies. We found this number by taking our beginning amount of $1,000 and then subtracting the amount we have remaining of $250 for a difference of $750. Just like the last example, we debit supplies expense here to show the usage of supplies, and we credit our supplies account to show the reduction of the amount of supplies we have on hand. Now you know all you need to know about adjusting journal entries.